Good evening. Welcome to Midnight History. Tonight, we travel back more than 500 years to a summer when the cobblestone streets of Strasbourg became a stage for one of history's strangest and most haunting mysteries. In July of 1518, ordinary townsfolk began to dance. Not at a festival, not at a wedding, not in celebration, but in torment. Their bodies shook, their feet bled, and yet they could not stop. Men and women collapsed from exhaustion, and still the dance went on. Some died with their shoes filled with blood. This terrifying episode has come to be known as the Dancing Plague of 1518. Was it madness? A disease of the mind, born from hunger and despair? Was it a curse, laid down by God? Or by a saint wronged by his people? Or was it something else? Something that slips between the cracks of medicine, faith, and history. To understand the mystery, we must first step into the world of Strasbourg, as it was, its streets, its fears, its people. Only then can we begin to see how such madness could take root. Strasbourg in 1518. A city under strain. Picture Strasbourg in the year 1518. The city lay on the western bank of the great river Rhine, a vital artery of trade and culture. Its skyline was dominated by the mighty Cathedral of Our Lady of Strasbourg, a marvel of Gothic architecture, whose single spire rose higher than any other in the Christian world. From miles away, travelers could see its dark, stony fingers pointing toward heaven. Within, priests sang the Latin Mass, incense hung heavy in the air, and candles flickered on ancient altars. Strasbourg was a free imperial city, answerable only to the Holy Roman Emperor himself. Its independence brought wealth. Markets overflowed with goods from Italy, France, and the German lands. Spices, silks, wool, and weapons. Merchants grew rich. Guilds of bakers, butchers, and tanners held power in the city council. From the outside, it looked like a thriving hub of prosperity. But under the surface, life was harder, far harder. Europe in the early 16th century was gripped by what modern scholars call the Little Ice Age. Winters were longer, summers shorter, harvests uncertain. When the rains failed, crops withered in the fields. When frosts struck, grain was ruined. Famine was not a distant memory, it was a constant threat. For the people of Strasbourg, hunger was part of daily life. Bread was small, meat scarce. Rye bread, often sour and dark, was the staple of the poor. In good years, it was barely enough to sustain them. In bad years, it carried mold and fungus that made stomachs cramp and heads spin. And hunger was only one shadow over the city. Disease stalked its streets. Outbreaks of plague had returned again and again since the Black Death of the 14th century. Smallpox, leprosy, and syphilis spread unchecked. Few families were untouched by sickness. Death was always near, marked by the tolling of bells and the solemn processions of mourners through narrow streets. Worse still, there was fear of the spirit. Strasbourg was deeply Catholic, but these were unsettled years. Just the year before, in 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther had nailed his theses to a church door in Wittenberg. His words challenging indulgences, questioning the church's power, were spreading like wildfire. Rumors of reform and whispers of heresy reached Strasbourg's taverns and pulpits. Some were excited, many were terrified, and everywhere superstition thrived. The people of Strasbourg believed in saints who could heal or curse. Saint Vitus, the patron of dancers and entertainers, was both loved and feared. To dishonor him was to risk his wrath, to be seized by a compulsion to dance uncontrollably. Mothers warned their children not to mock his feast day. Men crossed themselves when passing shrines. So here was Strasbourg in 1518, a city of wealth but also of hunger, a city of faith but also of fear, a city proud of its independence, yet overshadowed by plague, famine, and the trembling beginnings of religious upheaval. In such soil, strange seeds could take root. And in July of that year, they did. It began as many disasters do, not with a roar, but with a whisper. On a hot July morning in the year 1518, a woman named Frau Troffea stepped outside her narrow home on a cobblestone street in Strasbourg. No one paid her much attention at first. She was an ordinary woman, middle-aged, neither wealthy nor poor, the kind of person who passed through the crowd without notice. But that day, she began to move in a way no one could ignore. She started to dance. Not the graceful movements of a festival, nor the gentle sway of a village gathering. Her steps were jerky, frantic, almost violent. She flung her arms about as though unseen hands pulled her by invisible strings. Her body twisted and lurched across the street. Hours passed. The summer sun burned overhead. Sweat poured down her face, yet she did not stop. By evening, she collapsed, her body trembling with exhaustion. Neighbors rushed to her side, certain she would not rise again. But to their horror, she awoke the next morning, stood, and began once more to dance. For days, she continued. She danced until her feet bled, until her body was bruised and swollen, until she fell unconscious in the dirt. And when she woke, she danced again. At first, the townsfolk pitied her. They believed she had been cursed, perhaps by Saint Vitus himself. But pity soon turned to fear. Within a week, others joined her. Some claimed they felt the same compulsion, a force inside their bodies that could not be resisted. Others began simply to imitate, drawn in by the strange rhythm of her frenzy. By the end of July, dozens were dancing beside her. And then, like a spark in dry grass, the madness spread. By August, as many as 400 men and women filled the streets. Entire families watched as neighbors, friends, even loved ones spun and collapsed, only to rise again. A market day became a grotesque carnival of jerking bodies. The square outside the cathedral, filled with dancers who could not stop, their eyes blank, their mouths crying out for mercy. Panic swept the city. The people of Strasbourg had seen famine, had seen plague, but this was something different. This was not death sweeping in from the outside. This was death growing from within, moving arms and legs like marionettes. Children were kept indoors. Priests spoke of punishment, of sins unpaid. Whispers said the devil himself had entered the city. And always, in the center of it all, the dancers kept moving. Some collapsed from sheer exhaustion, only to rise again as if possessed. Others fell dead where they stood, their hearts unable to bear the strain. Shoes filled with blood, skin split open at the heels. Eyewitnesses reported cries that echoed down the streets. "Help me, I cannot stop." At the height of the outbreak, chroniclers claimed that as many as 15 people died each day. The council's response. The city's leaders could not ignore the crisis. The Council of Strasbourg gathered in emergency session. What was happening? Was it the devil? Was it the wrath of heaven? Or was it, perhaps, a sickness of the body? Physicians were summoned. Their diagnosis was grim and strangely misguided. They declared that the dancers suffered from a condition known as hot blood. Their bodies, they claimed, were overheated, inflamed, and the only cure was to let them dance until the fever burned itself out. And so, in a decision that would haunt Strasbourg, the council ordered that the dancers should be allowed, indeed, encouraged to continue. They cleared guild halls and marketplaces for the victims. They built wooden stages, and they hired musicians to play day and night to give rhythm to the madness. Drums beat, flutes wailed, fiddles screeched as men and women threw themselves into the frenzy. What had been horror became spectacle. Crowds gathered to watch, and the madness spread still further. But soon, the folly of this cure became clear. Far from easing the plague, the music only drew more into its grasp. What had begun with one woman now consumed hundreds. By late August, the council reversed its orders. Musicians were silenced. Public dancing was banned. Priests declared that the only hope lay in the mercy of heaven. The dancers were gathered, some carried half dead, and led to the shrine of Saint Vitus in the mountains. There, rituals of forgiveness were performed. Holy water was sprinkled on shoes, dyed red with blood. Crosses were pressed into shaking hands. Incense clouded the air as prayers rose for mercy. And slowly, over weeks, the madness ebbed. By September, the streets of Strasbourg were quiet again. But the silence was heavy, filled with fear. The memory of bodies collapsing, of neighbors screaming as they danced to their deaths, lingered like a scar. The city had survived, but it would never forget. Theories, searching for explanations. When the dancers of Strasbourg finally fell silent in September 1518, the city was left in shock. But for centuries afterward, scholars, doctors, priests, and historians would wrestle with a question that has never been fully answered. What truly caused the dancing plague? In the 16th century, two explanations dominated. The first was spiritual. Many believed it was the curse of Saint Vitus, a holy figure invoked in both healing and punishment. According to tradition, those who angered the saint would be compelled to dance against their will, sometimes until death. In a deeply religious society, where saints and demons were thought to walk among the living, this seemed a natural answer. For preachers in Strasbourg, the plague was a warning from heaven, a punishment for sin. The second explanation came from medicine, at least. Medicine as it was then understood. Physicians declared that the dancers' blood was overheated, inflamed, and boiling inside their bodies. To heal, they said, the victims must be allowed to dance until the excess heat was expelled. This diagnosis led directly to the council's disastrous decision to provide music and stages, a cure that nearly destroyed the city. But modern historians, armed with centuries of science, have offered new theories. One of the most popular is ergotism, caused by eating bread made from rye infected with ergot fungus. This fungus contains chemicals similar to LSD, and ergot poisoning can produce hallucinations, convulsions, and spasms. It is even linked to other great historical events, such as the Salem witch trials. Could the people of Strasbourg have consumed poisoned bread that summer? Perhaps. But ergotism usually weakens the body. It does not sustain days and weeks of relentless motion. Victims suffer vomiting, gangrene, and seizures, not coordinated group dancing. And why would so many fall ill at once, in such a contagious way? This leads us to another theory: mass psychogenic illness, what we might call mass hysteria. Historian John Waller argues passionately that this is the true cause. Strasbourg in 1518 was a city under crushing stress: famine, disease, poverty, and fear. People were deeply superstitious, and many believed in Saint Vitus's curse. When Frau Troffea began to dance, her neighbors may have seen in her the proof of divine punishment. Fear spread faster than fire. And in that environment, the human mind, desperate and fragile, betrayed the body. This theory suggests that the plague was not a disease of the flesh, but of the spirit, a psychological contagion, where belief itself became lethal. In modern times, we have seen echoes of this. Fainting spells in schools, mysterious illnesses that spread through communities without physical cause. But none have reached the scale or the horror of Strasbourg. Other possibilities have been raised. Some suggest neurological disorders, such as chorea, which causes involuntary jerking motions. Others point to epilepsy, but these affect individuals, not hundreds. The truth is elusive. Perhaps it was a mix of causes, a few struck by illness, others swept up by fear, all of it magnified by the superstitions of the age. In the end, the plague of Strasbourg may be unsolvable, balanced forever between madness and curse. Other dancing plagues across Europe. Strasbourg's tragedy was not the only time Europeans witnessed this strange phenomenon. As far back as the 11th century, in Saxony, chroniclers recorded a group of peasants who stormed into a churchyard and began to dance uncontrollably. They continued until they collapsed, some never rising again. Priests declared it divine judgment for their sins. In the 15th century, in Apulia, Italy, another outbreak took a different form. Victims claimed they had been bitten by tarantulas, whose venom drove them into spasms. The only cure, they said, was to dance to specific kinds of music until the poison left their bodies. Whole villages would gather, musicians playing frenzied tunes as the afflicted leapt and spun. From this belief grew the folk dance we still know today, the tarantella. In Germany, Switzerland, and the Low Countries, smaller outbreaks of uncontrollable dancing were recorded throughout the Middle Ages. They rarely reached the scale of Strasbourg, but the pattern was the same. Hardship, hunger, and fear seemed to trigger outbreaks of mass convulsion. These events were called choreomania, literally, a madness of dancing. And though each had its local flavor, all pointed to the same strange truth. Under the weight of famine, faith, and fear, entire communities could be seized by movement, by rhythm, by a madness that seemed to come from nowhere. But none matched the horror of Strasbourg in 1518, where hundreds danced in blood and death for nearly 2 months. Cultural legacy. The dancing plague did not vanish when the last dancer fell. Its shadow has lingered through the centuries, etched into memory, art, and culture. Contemporary records preserve the details. The Strasbourg City Council wrote of their desperate measures. Local sermons thundered that sin had brought punishment. Doctors scribbled theories of hot blood. And in the decades that followed, the physician Paracelsus studied the outbreak, dismissing demons but admitting that no medical explanation could fully account for it. Artists created woodcuts, showing gaunt men and women writhing in the streets. These images spread the story across Europe, ensuring that even those who had never seen Strasbourg with their own eyes would imagine its nightmare. And the memory did not fade. Even in our time, the dancing plague fascinates and horrifies. In 2020, filmmaker Jonathan Glazer released Strasbourg 1518, a short film capturing the raw terror of uncontrollable motion. In 2022, the band Florence Plus the Machine released Choreomania, a song directly inspired by Europe's dancing plagues. Part of their album Dance Fever. That same year, the novelist Kieran Millwood Hargrave published The Dance Tree, retelling the story through fiction, while artist Gareth Brooks created a graphic novel simply titled The Dancing Plague. Even in 2024, The rap duo Grim Salvo referenced the outbreak in their song Rat King 1518, proof that 5 centuries later, the memory of Strasbourg still resonates. The dancing plague has become more than a historical curiosity. It is a symbol of the fragile line between body and mind, faith and fear, reason and madness. It warns us that under pressure, entire communities can fall into chaos, swept away by forces they cannot control. By the autumn of 1518, the last dancers had fallen silent. Strasbourg streets returned to their normal rhythms, the clang of blacksmiths' hammers, the chants of priests, the hum of markets, but the silence after the madness was heavy. Families mourned the dead. Neighbors spoke in hushed voices of what they had seen, bodies jerking, cries of despair, shoes filled with blood. What truly happened in Strasbourg? Was it a curse, inflicted by Saint Vitus or by some darker power? Was it madness, born from famine, fear, and faith? Or was it something stranger still, a mystery that defies both science and religion? 500 years later, no answer is certain. The dancing plague remains unsolved, a riddle suspended between history and myth. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine the sound of feet against stone, echoing in narrow alleys. Imagine the wail of fiddles, the drumbeat that will not stop, and the sight of hundreds of neighbors, friends, and strangers moving without rest, without reason, without hope. The dancing plague of 1518 was not joy. It was not celebration. It was fear in motion, despair made flesh, a mystery that even now continues to dance in the shadows of history. Good night. This is Midnight History.